Welcome back. We are here to read chapter 13. Y'all, there's only 19 chapters in this book, so we are so close to being at the very end. I've had so many of you guys tell me how much you're enjoying the book and suggest other Gary Paulson books to read. I love that you're loving this book. Be sure to drop me a comment below so that I know that you watched it. Be sure to include your name in the comment because some of y'all's YouTube accounts aren't your name. And if for some reason you're not my student and you're watching this, also comment below because I've had some extra views here lately. So I'd love to see who's watching. Any hoozles. We are on chapter 13 today, so I'm going to read the questions, I'm going to read the chapter, then I'm going to review those questions, and then we're going to do our Shelton shout-out, Shelton Shenanigans shout-outs. Great, love that. Okay, so the questions for chapter 13 is... Now we're there. Okay. Number 1, it says, why did Annie say it was not good to drop her off somewhere? Number 2, what found Samuel and Annie in the woods? Number 3, who is Abner McDougall? Number 4, why did Samuel and Annie have to hide? Bless me. Did I read number 4? I was trying so hard not to sneeze, I forgot. Number 4, why did Samuel and Annie have to hide? Number 5, what did they say to look out for? And number 6, how did the dogs know? So that's a lot of interesting questions. Be sure to keep those in mind as we are going through this chapter 13. Okay. So remember at the end of chapter 12, it said that they had finally got done eating and Samuel and Annie had gone to sleep and then Samuel had leaned against a tree and fallen asleep also. So chapter 13. The signs were on the side of a tree. 2 boards hacked into the shape of an arrow and nailed up with a large handmade cut nails. One pointed to a trail that went south. Crude letters read, Philadelphia, 41 miles. The other arrow pointed straight east, New York, 38 miles. What did they say? Annie asked. I can get the letters, but I can't put them together so good yet. Samuel told her, about the same to either place, a 3-day walk, so let's get off the trail. I've got to think on it. They moved back into the undergrowth and settled out of sight. What's to think about? Annie said. We go to New York to get our mom and dad. She did not realize what she said, but Samuel heard the hour in her previous sentence. Something had happened in her mind. She found a way to stand it all, to keep going. So Samuel just nodded. What had Caleb said? Oh yes, New York was British. But the Americans still held Philadelphia, the center of the new government. Had his mother and father come by here and seen this sign? Did they know that safety and refuge were just 40 miles away? And then, did they have to go on to New York? He shook his head. I ought to take you into Philadelphia, where it's safe, and find a place for you. No, screamed Annie. But, no, I'm not going to leave you. You're the only family I have now. And it won't help you to leave me someplace because I'll just run and follow you, no matter what you say. We're going to find our folks. We're a family now, and that's all there is to it. We're going to New York, and we're going together. What I was going to say was, Samuel started. Together, Annie insisted. I was going to say that it would take too long to go down there and come back. 6 or 7 days. So I guess we'll stick together. Good, that's settled then, said Annie. Samuel almost smiled. She looked so ragged. Her dress was so indescribably dirty, and so was her face. Her hair stuck out at odd angles, and the dirt was so caked on her legs and feet that they looked like shoe leather at this point. And yet she was ready to do whatever needed to be done. I'm proud, he thought, to have you as a sister. All right, then, he said, let's go. They had a stroke of luck after they turned toward New York. Later that day, they saw a farm with fresh corn on the field. They crept into the edge of the field and took enough ears of corn for dinner. Just after leaving the field, back in the woods, alongside the trail, they heard an awful racket coming up the road from the rear. Something on wheels was clanking and clanging and rattling along. They were far enough back in the thickest part of the undergrowth so they couldn't see what it was, but it stopped nearby. All was quiet, and then Samuel heard dogs panting. Before he and Annie could move, two black and white, mostly collie dogs came up to them in the brush, looked at them for a moment, directly into their eyes, and gently tried to push them out toward the road, using their shoulders against Samuel and Annie's legs. "Hey," Samuel whispered, "leave off, leave us alone." He heard a laugh. "You might as well come out of there," a coarse, deep voice shouted. "I know right where you are, and I've got a 2-gauge swivel gun aimed right at you." "You stay here," Samuel whispered to Annie. "I'll see what's going on." But no, she was not about to stay there, not without her new brother. And they both stood out and walked out of the brush, the collies nudging them along. A huge freight wagon stood on the road, so stacked up with all sorts of everything, from bundles of rags to loops of tin, pots tied up like garland, to 2 saddles, to barrels and buckets and a rocking chair, that it looked like an enormous junk pile on wheels being pulled by 2 scruffy mules. "How's your day?" the man on the wagon asked, spitting in such a thick Scottish brogue that it was difficult to understand him. "I'm Abner McDougall, Tinker at Large. The 2 dogs are William and Wallace, named after a Scottish hero, of course." He saw Samuel's rifle and held up his hand. "Don't shoot. I was making a jest about the swivel gun. I'm not armed, as you can see. Don't believe in shooting things. Don't think it's right." He seemed to be dressed in a sewn-together rag and looked as untidy as the junk that he was carrying. His voice had a horrible rasping sound, like a steel shovel edging at rocks and gravel, and he was absolutely covered in unkempt gray hair. It was almost impossible to see his face for the hair, and the lower part of his beard was soaked with tobacco stains from dribbling spit. Ew. "I'm Samuel," Samuel said, "and this is Annie." Abner nodded and then looked at the dogs, which had moved in the front of the mules and were peering down the trail in the direction of New York. "Well, get in the wagon," Abner said. "What?" they both responded. "Get in the back of the wagon. Hide the rifle. Now, quick. Someone wrong is coming." "Wrong? Move! Hide the gun!" Abner insisted. Abner's firm voice left no room for argument. Samuel took Annie's hand and they climbed up in the back of the wagon. There was just room for them to sit with their legs out on the opened wagon bed. Samuel hid his rifle and powder horn beneath the pile of cloth. He had no sooner done this than there was the sound of hooves. A troop of British cavalry dragoons came around the bend in front of the wagon and stopped. Samuel could only see through the side of the wagon. There were about 20 riders in red uniforms and high fur hats and knee-high boots. They were carrying short muskets and sabers. The horses were well lathered, snorting and breathing hard, and the group broke formation and spread around the wagon. 2 men pulled their sabers and started poking in the load from the sides until Abner said, "Careful there! My bairn's inside." "Your what?" The commanding officer pulled up next to Abner. "My grandchildren. Don't go poking at them with your stickers either." "The purpose of your trip?" insisted the British officers. "We're headed for New York. I buy things and sell things. Would you be looking for anything in particular yourself?" "You could have any kind of illegal goods in there," the officer nodded at the wagon. "Any kind of contraband?" "I could, but I don't. And besides, I have a merchant's pass from the commanding general's staff, handwritten, signed, and sealed, all official." "Let me see it," insisted the British officer. Samuel heard the rustle of paper being passed back and forth. He could not see the front of the wagon, though. And then the officer's brusque voice. "All right, then, pass on, but watch for anything suspicious. We've just taken New York, and a lot of the rebel runners and deserters are trying to make their way up to Philadelphia." Samuel looked at the troopers around the back of the wagon who were looking at him. One smiled and nodded at Annie as she sat quietly, her big eyes and jaw tight. "Fall in," the officers commanded, and the men wheeled their horses into formation and rode past. "Up, Brutus! Up, Jill!" Abner slapped the reins across the rumps of the mules, and they grunted and started pulling the wagon, which began to roll ahead slowly. Stay in the wagon until they're out of sight, Abner insisted. Until they're gone. Then come up to the seat and we'll talk. Samuel was so confused. He decided to trust no one, and yet this old man had come forward and lied for them. He wasn't really sure what to do, but some part of him really wanted to trust Abner. He watched the cavalry unit disappear around a bend in the road, and then stood and climbed alongside the load until he was at the seat, looking down at the backs of the mules. Annie sat down in the middle next to Abner, and Samuel took the outside. How did you know they were wrong kind of people? Samuel asked. The dogs. They told me. The dogs told you? Annie scoffed. I didn't hear nothing. That's because you don't know how to listen. It's in the way they stand, how their ears set, how the hair on the back of how the hair on their back stand up. If you know the dogs and they know you, they'll tell you what to expect. How did you know we might think that the British soldiers were bad? Abner slapped the reins of the mules. Pick it up, pick it up. How could I think otherwise? Somebody comes down the trail and you hide in the bushes. This is a largely British road, and you come out carrying a gun at the ready? He laughed. It's hard to think you'd act that way with a friend. We don't like the British, Annie said suddenly. They're all bad. Every dang one of them. They both stared at her. They killed our folks, our family. Her voice cracked. And I miss them. I miss my mom and pop. And I even miss that red chicken that pecked at my toes. She started crying, leaning against Samuel. Abner said, I think you better tell me what happened. And to Samuel's complete surprise, he took a deep breath and did just that. Sat back and listened without saying a word. Abner seems like such a great man. Okay, so let's review these questions so we can make sure there's no confusion. Number 1, why did Annie say that it was not good to drop her off somewhere? So what did she say she was going to do? Number 2, what found Samuel and Annie in the woods? So how did they, what found them? Because it wasn't Abner, remember. Who is Abner McDougall? So what did he do for a living? It said in there what he did. Number 4, why did Samuel and Annie have to hide? Number 5, what did they say to look out for? So what did the British people that came, what did the British people tell Abner to look out for? And number 6, how did the dogs know? So how did the dogs know that the people that were coming were bad people? So that is all for chapter 13. Let's do some shout outs. Okay, so from my homeroom, I want to shout out Michaela Walker. She has been hopping on that Google Classroom every single day and doing all of her work and been doing an amazing job. So shout out to you, sis. From Miss Savage's class, I want to shout out Malia. Also been hopping on that Google Classroom and making sure she gets all her work done. You can see her name, everything's backwards, right there. And that's my shout out wall of kiddos who are getting all of their work done and making sure that they are logging on each and every day. And then for Mr. Baker's classroom, I want to give a shout out to Kamaria. Tootie, you're doing great, and I'm super, super proud of you. To all my kids, I miss you so, so much. If your name is on one of the shout outs, then be sure that you comment below saying that you heard it. Also, be sure that you show your parents so that they can be super proud of you just like I am. If you have not heard your name in a shout out, don't worry. Make sure that you are continuing to get all of your work done. And I promise you, if you are working hard and you are joining those Google Meets when you can and you are doing the best that you can, I will be shouting you out very, very soon because I'm super proud of all the awesome work that we're doing in 4th grade. So, if y'all have some extra time, there are some extra bonus videos on my channel, obviously. I just uploaded one last week. So feel free, I think I uploaded a couple of them last week actually, so feel free to take some time and listen to those and answer the polls at the very end of them and get your vote in on which books I should read next. Be sure to comment below with your name if you're one of my students. If not, then still comment so I can say hello. And as always, if you need anything, I'm just a phone call away. All right, love y'all.